Magandang araw mga kaproyekto. Welcome to part 2. No? Siguro nagtataka kayo, ba't biglang andito sila lahat na apat? Ano? Remember, this is part 2 of our episode last week on pagtatatag ng bagong administrasyon. Lalo na ngayon na nagsimula na ang pagkapangulo ni Pangulong Marcos. Pinag-usapan natin nung nakaraan, 'di ba, yung mga appointed positions, no? So ngayon naman ay meron tayong napakahalagang bahagi ng gobyerno, kaya nandito kami lahat ngayon dahil part 2 to, Manolo, Leloy, and Carlo.
Yes, Fads. Natutuwa po ako kasi I was given the opportunity to invite over to our show one of my most respected mentors, and I worked with her. She was my boss in the DFA. She entered the service in 1979, so 1 year old pa lang ako. So alam na alam niya ang civil service, ang bureaucracy natin. So please welcome Ambassador Laura Del Rosario. Hi, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. That was
Morning.
a very nice introduction. I mean, just speaking a look at you was, oh my God, she must be ancient. Okay, anyway. Thank you. All right.
Ma'am, marami pong salamat for joining us.
For your interrogation.
Ma'am, ang magsisimula ho ay si Manolo. Ang aming palaging taya palagi ho yan eh. So Manolo, okay. Please start the ball rolling.
Yes, ma'am. Because last time, pinag-usapan namin yung ginagawa ng bagong Pangulo, ang pagpili ng gabinete, ang pagtatalaga ng mga iba't ibang mga miyembro ng pamahalaan. Ngunit, sa araw na ito, gusto namin pag-usapan ang mga miyembro ng pamahalaan na nandun kahit nagpapalit ang mga Pangulo, meaning the civil servants, the professionals in our government. And sa pananaw siguro ng lahat sa pamahalaan, ang pinaka-professional sa mga professional, ang Department of Foreign Affairs. Hindi lang dahil dun sa napakahirap makapasa dun sa foreign service examinations, but yung kultura ng ahensya mismo, kung saan talaga ang mga magagaling ang umaangat. So siguro po, baka pwede lang niyo po ikwento sa amin na paano nung pumasok kayo in 1978 when you entered government. That was the first Marcos administration, and you were there nung nagpalit ang administrasyon in 1986. So maybe what was it like to rise through the ranks and then to go through perhaps one of the most complicated transitions from one government to another in our history?
Bago mag-start si Ambassador Lula, sabihin ko lang si Ambassador Lula, I forgot to mention, is a career diplomat. She rose up the ranks as a junior officer. Yun yung tawag natin vice consul, until finally she was appointed as ambassador, and then she retired as undersecretary for international economic affairs. Go ahead, Amba.
Okay. Of course, all of us had to pass through the examination process. But during the time of the first President Marcos, there was a process called certification. The president signed somebody as a certified officer, and that person in a way is a political appointee, and somehow he could serve as vice consul until maybe he could reach the rank of ambassador. And because Marcos stayed so long in power, the ones that he appointed as vice consul, they were already at the top. So at that time, the department decided to retain them because of their experience, and they removed the certification process. So in that sense, it was already politicized, no? So when I came in, it was I was then assigned in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I could sense really that the difference was that because we were led by Carlos Garcia, he was the minister, then Secretary of Foreign Affairs, but somehow there was a sense that how shall I call it, because it was already martial law, there was a sense that there was not much leeway really, in how we were moving. Besides, it was the Cold War. We had to choose one side versus the other, and there were some countries like India, we were on the opposite side of the political divide, right? But when I got assigned abroad, somebody told me to keep some of my liberal ideas to myself. And because they said, you don't know how people might misinterpret you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, one of the people here might be a conduit for, reporting all our thoughts. It struck me as very Orwellian. Okay. And I said, is there a thought police somewhere here? but then of course I was just so busy taking care of my tasks as a vice consul, then as a consul, and I was also covering the United Nations. I was an alternate representative to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and also to UNIDO, that's the UN Industrial Development Organization. So that was the atmosphere then. But what was
may I rewind a little bit? If I understand you correctly, when you were starting, there was actually two tracks in the DFA. You could rise through the ranks as a career official, but President Marcos at the time could certify people to join the foreign service, and they could rise through their own track. And you were saying that because
actually,
of the
actually they should not have, because you are certified to a position. That's how I understood it. But somehow I don't know why they got promoted. And I said, isn't it? It's like a presidential appointee, diba? You get appointed to a position and to a rank. Unfortunately, Manol, that's what happened. So there were those who really became chiefs of mission, so to speak, that because that was the highest rank.
Okay, so you're balancing this reality, and then also when you started seeing the world abroad, the Philippines itself was had little choice of where it wanted to go because it was on one side in the Cold War.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Okay. So let's go now to 1983 and post 1983. Okay, Aquino was assassinated, and then if you recall, there was the snap elections. There were the snap elections, and then there was a breakaway from the foreign service on whom they should support. Remember that when I remember Consul General Raul Rabe was in Hawaii and he said, I support Cory Aquino. So that broke loose the press, and they asked each one of us in the foreign service, are you supporting, and in my case, I was caught in a very, what I felt was really a very complicated position. I was just what we call that, foreign service officer class 1. That means I was mid-career, okay? I was then the consul general. And it so happened that my boss at that time was the late Domingo Siason, and he won a position as Director General of UNIDO. So I was chargé d'affaires. And it so happened that at that time, when the snap elections happened, I was then the chargé d'affaires, right? So President Marcos took his oath of office, and then later on President Aquino took her oath of office. So I was in a quandary. Okay, whom am I representing? Because I know that as the head of an embassy, if I were the ambassador, and I'm supposed to be representing the government of that was in my in my naive mind. So I went to the protocol of the Ministry of Austria. And then I asked the ambassador, who was so very nice to me, and said, Laura, I said, don't worry. He said, you have 2 presidents, but we will recognize you because you represent the people of the Philippines, not your government, whichever government it is. So that gave me enough confidence to go on with my work. And that somehow stuck in my mind. I am a representative of the people of the Philippines. And I think that was my consciousness all throughout. So whoever was president, I carried it. I carried on my functions. And I stayed on as Carlos said, until the end of President Aquino III's administration. Okay.
Wow, that's so all the presidents po, Ambassador, from 86. I mean, from the time of Marcos, actually, no?
Yeah, from 79. That's why I said I may seem ancient now to your audience, no? Can you imagine?
I have a kind of basic question po, which is, I just want to return to this idea of a career bureaucrat as opposed to a political appointee. Can you present to our audience just yung basic differences in terms of what you do? But I think it's also important to examine yung mindset po ba? Kasi magkaiba po yung mindset ng career at saka ng political appointee.
Yeah, because for us, we were always thinking in terms of national interest. No, what is our national interest, and who defines that national interest? And there are some presidents who think that they are the one who should define the national interest. Although in our view, as a career diplomat, I always hope that the new president would always consult, the career people, because we are the ones who carry the thread, the narrative, the thread of narrative, the thread of our positions, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed, 1989, 1991. Okay, so how do we navigate the world now? It's unipolar, and then later on became multipolar. Because you see, like for instance, in the case of President Duterte, when he pivoted towards China, he should not have somehow trashed the US. Because for us, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to balance our relationships. It's not an either or. Ang problema, there's some people who do binary thinking. It's either this or that.
Either
And,
or.
yeah. It's not helpful in diplomacy. Diplomats, in fact, the old adage, it's addition, no? Not division, not subtraction. We
Pero
should do addition.
yeah. Balikan ko lang yung sinabi ni Leloy kasi madalas natin pinag-uusapan dati to yung political appointees kasi nung panahon ko nung nakatrabaho ko po si Ambalula, she asked me to research yung diplomatic history natin at isa sa mga nakita ko noon yung tradition nga of political appointees, and in recent years kasi yung political appointees parang nagkaroon ng masamang reputation, pero para sa mga ating viewers, kailangan natin ipakita kung bakit tayo nagkaroon or bakit tayo hanggang ngayon merong political appointees, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, no? Kasi the political appointees, as Amba can expand later on, were put in place to augment the service at that time, which was very small and hindi pa naman kasing laki kagaya nung ngayon. Kagaya nung kaya marami tayong kinuha from the academe, yung mga judges, yung mga newspaper, kasi sila yung may mga experience na, so pinasok natin post-war. Go ahead, Amba. Saka ito, isa pang nabanggit sa akin ni Amba noon. Sometimes ang kailangan nating yung mga magagandang benefits ng political appointee, kung maglalagay ka ng isang ambassador sa isang post na heavy on functions, and ang budget ng embahada minsan limitado lang po. So minsan yung nilalagay natin doon yung medyo may capacity to ano ho yan, may balancing act tayo ano. So minsan nga naabuso. Pero yung ano ho yung mga ibang positive benefits ng political appointees?
Okay. For one thing, the political appointees also are protected by the Foreign Service Act, which was enacted in 1992, I think 1991, 92. It was the, what do you call that? It was passed by Senator Shahani, who came from the Foreign Service. One benefit that I see from the political appointees, as Carlos said, they augment, yung dinadagdagan nila, yung hindi namin kaya. Halimbawa, Tagalog tayo dito, no? Okay lang? Oo, Tagalog. Okay. Halimbawa, ako'y napunta sa Estados Unidos, ang daming opportunities doon para kumuha ng business. And then, of course, I have to do a lot of entertaining. Yung aking budget, maybe at that time, if I were there when I was there during the time of Clinton, was only $3,000 a month. What can you do with $3,000 a month? When you're trying to
minimum wage.
When you're trying to host, maybe even if it's not the CEO, at least the senior vice president of a company whom you want to invite to the Philippines, and we want him to consider the Philippines. But having said this, in my mind, because I'm very economic in my orientation, that's why maybe I was appointed Undersecretary for International Economic Relations, because I see an ambassador as the number one salesman for the Philippines in that country, to sell our political ideology, to sell our, to impart our values, what we stand for, the values that we have, assuming that somehow we know where we're going, and at the same time to spend from his own money if needed to attract the investments that we have. The problem is if the political appointees are just rewardees for campaigning, and they just want to be called ambassador until they die, because our titles, once we gain
hindi
them,
nawawala.
Hindi nawawala.
But I guess this is a good way to enter yung because I was interested yung sa tanong ni Leloy at yung binabanggit ni Carlo. Sa pagkakaintindi ko, Amba, sa konstitusyon, ang taga kumpas kumbaga ng ating foreign policy ang pangulo.
Oo.
Yun ang binibigay sa kanyang kapangyarihan.
Mm-mm.
But the reason na meron tayong DFA ay hindi naman pwede lang i-invento niya o
Yeah.
gawin na
Mm-mm.
lang ang mood niya dahil
Mm-mm.
marami na rin tayong mga kasunduan na galing sa mga
Mm-mm.
nauna pang pangulo at administrasyon. Tama po
Mm-mm.
ba 'yon? Kaya
Oo,
po
tama.
kailangan natin ng mga professional katulad ninyo na
Oo.
taga-bigay ng payo, taga
Oo.
bigay ng kaalaman. Ngayon,
Mm-mm.
dahil ang pangulo lang naman ang may ganitong kapangyarihan, ang magiging kinatawan niya sa ibang bansa, dapat malaya rin siyang pumili ng siguro
Oo,
yung
tama. Yeah.
so
Mm-mm.
doon po pumapasok yung political na
Yes,
appointee.
perfect. Oo,
Okay.
oo.
Okay.
Oo.
But
At yung,
katulad na sorry po.
hindi, ikaw na, you continue. Ikaw.
Ngayon, but at the same time, meron ding advantage, if I understand correctly, sa pagpili ng yung tumaas mula sa rangko. Like, for example, ang piniling Secretary of Foreign Affairs ngayon, si Ambassador Manalo,
Mm-mm.
professional, di ba? Career diplomat siya. And ang napansin ko, parang maganda yung reaksyon kahit ng mga kritiko ng kasulukuyang Pangulo dahil yun nga, professional ang pinili niya. Would that also
Yes.
be correct? So, Carlo, yun ang
Yes.
benefit siguro, no? Yung...
Oo. Oo.
Okay.
Oo. Okay. So, pagdating kasi, para sa akin, iba yung ipopromote ng political, di ba? Dahil iba nga yung kanilang background. And ako, mas gusto kong ina-appoint nila, in some sense, it depends kung anong bansa, yung mga malalaking business people, yung sanay sa business. Kasi alam nila, right now, politics is economics and economics is politics. Kahit anong gawin mo, it's still money that makes the world go round, as they say. and then if you don't know how to connect with CEOs or you have your own insecurity, let's say you are just somebody in the province and you don't really have, and then you suddenly are thrust to become the ambassador, let's say in Japan. How will you impress the Japanese? Whereas if you are the head of a big corporation in the Philippines and you're assigned in Japan or London or Washington, D.C., at least they know what you're talking about because you know the ropes, so to speak. But let me go back to the career people. We also need that kind of, we need that kind of, what they call that, our special niche, so to speak, in the foreign service. And it's also important that the president really consults us because sometimes when I was assigned, halimbawa, I was abroad, during the time of President Duterte. I hope he will not take this against me. And then he makes a pronouncement. And then my counterparts, the ministry of the government where I was in, would ask me, Ambassador, will you please explain what your president meant? And then, of course, I don't know what he meant, right? Because it didn't pass through the process. And if I ask, let's say, as an assistant secretary in charge, let's say, of Asia Pacific, I'll say, hey, anong ibig sabihin ng presidente nito? Di ba? They should be able to tell me, Lula, ito yung context, know the context. And then they tell me this is how it is. And I know that the context is coming from a particular point of view. At least I will know how to, if I use the word, I will know how to spin it. Yes,
Ma'am, siguro malawakan ko lang ng konti yung inyong reflections and experience ng being the professional part of the government, which we call the bureaucracy, no? Kaya even the bureaucracy, ma'am, di ba, nagkaroon na ng parang negative, but actually hindi, dapat hindi po, di ba? And I think you're one of the proofs na hindi masama ang bureaucracy or career professionalizing the government. How would you, ma'am, your own reflections on looking back at a very fruitful and distinguished career as a professional, as part of the bureaucracy of the government? Can you share also, ma'am, yung strengths ng bureaucracy and maybe some thoughts para maunawaan din ho ng mga nanonood sa atin na porket sabihin mong bureaucracy, masama na, di ba? Kasi may ganun din yung di ba? May ganun din downside ang bureaucracy. Maybe you could share your your own journey.
I'll describe first what makes the bureaucracy seem to have a negative image. Yung unang-una, yung mga regulatory bureaus or departments, yung mga bureaucrats dyan, Ginagamit nila yung regulations, the approval, as money-making thing. You know, di ba? Kasi regulation yan eh. So, pinagkakaperahan nila yan. That's one. Second, a regulation is really just meant to make sure that the person follows the rules, not because dahil pipirmahan mo ito, kailangan bayaran ka. That's one negative image of the bureaucrat. The other one, of course, is the fact na talagang may palakasan. I won't deny that. Kasi meron tayong civil service exam. At I am sure lahat ng pumapasa sa gobyerno ay pumapasa sa civil service exam. Pero pinipili ba yung the top ones who passed? Or is it because kamag-anak nito, tapos pumasa, halimbawa ang grade is 75%, porque may kamag-anak sa loob, kukunin. How about the one who got 85%? Kasi kung minsan, kaya ko alam ito kahit sa mga teachers, you know, I put up my own little school. Yung mga guro sa akin, umaalis, sabi na, ma'am, pupunta po ako sa public school. Sabi ko, paano kayo siguradong matatanggap kayo sa public school? Tapos may magbubulong sa akin, ma'am, may tita ho yan sa public school. May tita ho yan sa division. Ano, may kamag-anak, may tagalakad. Kasi, oo, yung mga ganon. Kaya siyempre naisip ko, kung ganon ka, ako palakasan din. And I think alam din ni Carlo, sa Department of Foreign Affairs, meron din ganon. Makakapasa sila, pumasa sa civil service, but were they the best in their cohort or in their batch? And then later on, lumalabas, maraming magkakakamag-anak, di ba? So, in any agency, in any department, and if you are related to one another through affinity or through tribal linkages or through utang na loob, you can just imagine how hard it is to reform.
Kaya,
To reform the agency.
ito yung pinag-uusapan na kung gaano madaling mag-criticize na ba't ganyan ang gobyerno, pero makikita ng ating mga sa nakikinig kung gaano kahirap magkaroon ng balancing act. Kasi in one point lang sa foreign service, madalas nung nandun tayo, madalas nang marinig yung golden age nung diplomacy. Yan po yung kagaya nila Carlos P. Romulo, nila Leon Magirero, sila SP Lopez. Ito po yung mga titingnan namin na magagaling na diplomat, pero hindi po career to mga to. So mga political to. So yung na-attract sila kasi bypass or hindi sila dumaan sa proseso. And ngayon, naglagay tayo ng through the law that was the Foreign Service Act in 92. Medyo stringent na yung pagpasok, so medyo hindi na kasing hirap. So madalas ko narinig na nandun ako, paano natin ma-attract yung mga kagaya ulit nila Leon Magirero, nila Carlos P. Romulo. Ang hirap noon, 'di ba? Kasi hindi mo na sila ma-attract kasi yung napaka-strict na po nung nung civil service rules.
Actually hindi eh. Kasi yung Foreign Service Act yung ginawa ni Senator Shahani, it allows up to 49% of political appointees. Nung panahon ni Marcos during his time, I think maybe just about 20% were political, the likes of, as you said, SP Lopez and everybody else. There was a time during the mid-administration of President Ramos, halos pareho na yung career sa political, because how they divide 49% versus 51%? It's just sometimes it's a matter of just three posts, di ba? I mean, assuming we have 68 posts, all you have to do is make sure that the career will have 3 posts more than the political. Pwede pa rin, Carlo. Ang problema lang yung pagpili. Kasi nung unang panahon, nung panahon ni na Carlos Romero, the post-1946, sina SP Lopez, pinili sila because they were also, in a way, public intellectuals, right? I mean, they were journalists. They were not reporters. They were journalists. And I suppose, for me, there's a difference between a reporter and a journalist. And a journalist is someone who knows more than reporting facts. They know what is behind the story. They know what is behind the decision of a president, of a minister. And we need those. And I know that because when I was taking care of APEC, and I know Manolo was there with us, hirap ako sa mga ibang junior reporters because I had to explain the context of the economic issues. I mean, what do you mean by supply chain? What do you mean by liberalization of this? What do you mean by liberalization of services? Parang akong nagbibigay ng APEC 101. So I think, pag mag-train din tayo ng students in journalism, they should also have a major in political economy, or at least in government and public management, because otherwise how can they reflect what is happening? Otherwise, they just rely on press releases. And press releases are self-promoting, if I may say that.
Ma'am, siguro nabanggit niyo na yung downside ng bureaucracy. Ano naman ho yung masasabi ninyong ang strength of a good bureaucracy? Ano naman ho yun, ma'am, na sa karanasan niyo, kasi kagaya ng sabi ko, I am sure my colleagues in the project will agree with me. You are the best proof of a good bureaucracy, di ba?
Sana nga. Others call me a snake. Kasi daw, I bite the people that I leave behind.
Oh, nako, ma'am. Maybe you should defend your tribe this time.
Aha, di ba, ma'am? Kasi ako, ma'am, I work a lot with the DepEd.
Yeah.
And, there are good men and women in the bureaucracy. Meron din ho talagang mahirap katrabaho, pero meron din hong mahuhusay. So, baka pwede nyo ho rin bahagi, ano ba yung advantage din ng, number one, ma-professionalize ang bureaucracy, and tama ang maging, and part of the professionalization is yung pag-angat ng mga tao sa bureaucracy, dapat maganda. Maybe you can share your experience, ma'am.
Ang maganda kasi sa amin, halimbawa, I think you've seen that, as Manolo said, in a good way, in a flattering way, that we are supposed to be the best, right? Among the departments. For one thing, because we undergo the testing, we are tested, and then before we become ambassadors, we undergo another test. But I'm talking about the foreign service officers. I'm not talking about the rank and file. Okay, but even I think at one point, Senator of Finance, during the time of President Aquino, trying to remember his name, he also said, you know what, sabi niya, I think the Department of Finance should follow what the Department of Foreign Affairs is doing. Okay, okay, but you see, because we also have a training arm, the Foreign Service Institute, where Carlo came from. So we train everybody there, even the rank and file. We teach them a little about every issue. If you have a seminar on China, on Russia, we invite them. So they get to learn also, they get to improve themselves. Now, the thing that I like about us, we already know how to define our national interest and what is national security. Because for some people, halimbawa, I'll give you an example. This is very controversial. Did the arbitral tribunal decision is promoting it and spreading its acceptance part of our national interest, or is it not? Because why is it that some people say, put it aside, put it in the back burner? Because it's not to our national interest, to promote it. Because some people think, what is national interest? Maybe they have a feeling that national interest means as long as you're at peace with everybody, right? But why don't you take a look at it from the point of view of national security? What will secure us as a people? So for us in the foreign service, we think, like for instance, the arbitral tribunal. If, let's say, the head of government says, we don't want to rattle China, we don't want China, to do something aggressive towards us, let's put it aside. And then there are others who said, look, we want this, so why don't we try to get supporters from the other governments and say, let us work on the rule of law. So for some people, they're thinking in terms of national interest. It is in our interest to remain at peace with China. And I don't disagree with that. I agree with that. But then you also have to take a look at it from the point of view of national security. Is that affecting our national security? Because for us, the diplomats, the career ones, to us, national security does not just refer to the absence of war or to our capacity to defend ourselves against war. It's actually protecting the life that we have, even if it's not up to the quality that we want. We want, for instance, why do we negotiate on climate change? Why do we want also to minimize the carbon footprint that we have? Because we're one of the endangered countries in the world. We're in the top 5. That's national security. That's human security. Food shortage, drought, transnational crimes. globalization, and of course, even narcotic drugs, human trafficking. These are all part of national security. To me, these are just as important as protecting our territorial integrity. Sama-sama yan eh. So national interest and national security, dapat ayusin yan sa, as I said, we tend to think in terms of binary terms eh. Kung minsan, we really have to see things as a whole. Kaya tuloy later on, nagkakawatak-watak yung ating mga, and then we get lost in in the way we navigate the world because we're doing things in terms of binary terms.
Para po sa akin, ma'am, yung isa pang strength ng bureaucracy is yung continuity. Kasi nga, yung politics, nagpapalit depende sa presidente, pero yung bureaucracy, they stay. And I think common, hindi lang po sa inyo, but for all bureaucrats, yung idea of institutional memory, yung kailangan may institutional memory.
Yes, yeah. Oh.
I wonder if you can discuss that concept a little.
Okay.
Okay.
When we're talking about a particular position, you know that we have arrived at a particular position after a lot of discussions on the downside and the upside, and according to our national interest and according to our national security. Okay, so we take a look at that, and we also take a look at how will impact the ordinary man in the street, the farmer, the fisher folk. But if there is an interjection in a position and it doesn't follow that, that deep-rooted policy that has emerged through the years, through the political developments of the world and in the region, then definitely we will get lost. And at the same time, we will not, it will, to me, it's what I call a disruption. And it's not more than a disruption. It can also mean that in the minds of the people, even of the people in defense and security, they will also start to think, what does this mean? Because when we get our position in foreign policy, our position is also integrated with the position of people in the Department of National Defense, the position in our Department of Finance, Department of Trade. Because as I said, national security is not just political and defense, it's also economic. Kaya dapat pag-isipan yun eh. So that's why I don't want people to think in binary terms. It will not work because everything that we do, as I said, is building, it's not dividing.
So yung institutional memory din po, ma'am, if I hear you correctly, parang nanggagaling din dun sa malalim at mabusising pag-intindi na kasaysayan mismo ng gobyerno at yung mga kailangan ng gobyerno yun, batay dun sa kasaysayan na yun.
Yes, right. At saka batay din sa kasaysayan ng rehiyon. We have to look at the regional realities. Kasi yung iba, akala mo, iisa lang ang realidad, no? Ito na lang. Itong malalim na question, we still debate on this. Ang foreign policy ba, nanggagaling sa domestic events o nanggagaling sa regional events? Ano ang ibabase mo? Dahil ba ang pangangailangan ng mga Pilipino o yung gusto ng mga Pilipino? Or is it because, ang interest ng Pilipino lang dapat ang susundin kasi mayroong nangyayari sa labas ng bansa na hindi alam ni Pedro at ni Juan. Kaya ang kagustuhan ni Pedro at ni Juan ay hindi naman yan lang ang tamang foreign policy. So, should foreign policy be based on domestic events, domestic issues, or should it be anchored on universal values of human rights, rule of law, governance, justice? Because if that is the case, then that means that a particular government, let's say China, if it has to be following the universal laws, then its record on human rights violation is that the right policy? Kasi pumapasok ito pag ang isang presidente o isang leadership, halimbawa sa ibang bansa, when they curtail the political and civic rights of their people, is that a policy that the foreign service should defend? Or should we rely on something higher? You see, ito dapat dito kami nagbabalanse kasi mahirap ito eh. Kasi pag sinabi ng presidente, kailangan kong i-protect ang aking bansa sa abuso ng halimbawa ng mga kriminal, maaaring papasok ang Internal Security Act, di ba? And then later on, ikaw na ambassador sa labas, you have to defend the Internal Security Act against the universal rules, maybe basic civic and political rights. Yung ganon. So, that's why kami, aware kami sa ganyan eh. So, alam namin paano ba i-calibrate ito. And so, in the UN Commission on Human Rights, we were always known to vote for those who would like to uphold basic human rights and the rule of law. But then, of course, floor contemplation happened. And of course, we had to pay attention to our overseas workers. Okay? And we know that it has become the third pillar of our foreign policy, protection of our citizens abroad, particularly overseas workers. Ngayon, merong isang bansa, halimbawa sa Middle East, na merong violation sa human rights sa kanilang bansa. I think alam nyo kung sino yan, di ba? At siyempre meron din tayong mga kababayan nagtatrabaho doon. Tapos may resolution sa UN Commission on Human Rights about paano siya magboboto. So, you have to choose. Magboboto ka ba to, against that country where perhaps you have 100,000 workers working, or should you vote to support that country? So almost always we end up abstaining, or perhaps we don't attend the vote at all. That to me really says how much we really have to listen, to balance the domestic issues versus our universal values. Yun ang ibig kong sabihin.
Leloy, siguro dito natin magandang ipasok yung konsepto ng tenure of service, which is related to sa bureaucracy. Kasi magandang binanggit ni Ambayo kasi madalas kuwari hindi ka sang-ayon sa direksyon na pinupuntahan ng isang administrasyon, and yung civil servants natin may act contrary to that direction, and lumalakas ang loob nila dahil nga meron silang tinatawag na tenure of service na hindi sila agad-agad matatanggal as opposed to yung political. And at the worst that can happen is sasabihin nila ilalagay ka sa freezer or hindi ka di ba? So but at the end of the day, we have these things in place para mas strengthen nga yung civil service natin. So marami ho tayong hindi nakikita natin sa kinukwento ni Amba, hindi perfect ang civil service, but slowly nag-aano tayo eh. We're putting in incremental changes that strengthens it.
And I think one of the things na nabanggit nga ni Ambassador yung I think mahalaga, and more departments I think are trying to put up their own academies, no, in quotation marks, like I know yun nga ang pinaka-popular syempre ang ang foreign affairs, ang Department of Education. Actually itong huling administrasyon ni Secretary Briones strengthened the academy, no. In fact, she spent a lot of time reviewing the National Educators Academy of the Philippines, yung NEAP. No? Kasi sabi nga niya, ano ang karapatan natin, tawagin natin tong academy kung wala tayong really qualified people in that training institution. And then I know rin, recently, I know na including DILG, no? Nagtayo na rin ng kanilang training arm. I think yun, di ba, Ambassador, I think that's something that you mentioned na mahalaga na meron din ganun training institute. Yeah. Aside from yung sinasabi nga ni Leloy na institutional memory, na talagang yan ay kumbaga that is the major contribution of the bureaucrats of the department, And I think ma'am yung kwento mo ako, yun lang, for example, di ba, for example, I'm sure, let's say si Ambassador Legdameo, who's newly appointed to the UN, from London to UN, I'm sure ma'am, mag-aaral yan ng husto, no? Mag-aaral yan ng husto. And of course, you can consider him also sa tagal niya sa service. May pagka-career na rin, kahit political appointee. And I think it is, pag may bagong political appointee, yun ang kahalagahan ng mahusay na bureaucracy. Kasi even the political appointee has to be briefed by those who have been there, ano, in the
Oo,
department.
oo, oo. At saka, Father, pag may political appointee, malakas ang backstopping na ginagawa ng DFA. They
Okay.
assign a good group of
Yes.
officers who will really support the ambassador. Pero sa akin, kahit anong ahensya, kahit anong departamento ang ating tinuturing, dapat pabayaan din yung freedom to discuss, our principles, our philosophies. Kasi importante sa akin yun. Kasi kung ang umiiral one mind, one thought, ano na lang mangyayari sa atin, di ba? Kailangan talaga, importante ang diversity of opinions and diversity of thought. Of course, there's a predominant thought or principle na umiiral sa isang administrasyon. Pero dapat pabayaan din yung iba. Otherwise, ano na lang tayo? Parang mga robots na lang tayo. Diba? Mabuti pang mag-artificial intelligence na lang tayo.
Naalala ko dati yung kwarto ni Amba sa Foreign Service, bukas yan. So pinakita niya sa amin na if you have ideas, if you have questions about what we're doing here, kato ka lang, pasok. Madalas kong ginagawa yun, bata pa lang ako noon, na I was 20 something years old, kakatok ako, ma'am, ba't ganito? Tapos at the end of the day, kung maganda yung ideas ko, she'll consider it. Pero madalas sasabihin rin niya, hindi sangayon yan sa rules and regulations, pero maganda nga na sinasabi na po-promote siya na nothing is ever off the table. We can discuss this, but within the realities of the bureaucracy.
Oo. And also within the realities of where we want to go as a nation. Kasi kamukha ngayon, halimbawa, somebody said, okay, the president should stay for 10 years. Okay, fine. If you listen to Gorbachev, I reviewed his talk that he gave 11 years ago. He warned against Putin, and he said Putin is in his 10th year, he should be removed. He will become dangerous. And look, 10 years later, 20 years into his job, look at what happened to Russia. We should also look at this. It's not a perpetuation of, I'm sorry, I might get into trouble.
Alam niyo, meron akong hindi nasabi nung diniscuss natin kasi we had one episode where tinakal namin yung oath o yung oath of office ng presidente, and hindi ko na nabanggit as public servants, meron din tayong sariling mga pinipirmahan na oath of office. Ako, naalala ko nung lang ako, minor government, may pinirmahan ako, tapos nandun yung duties and responsibilities ko.
Yeah.
Medyo core nito, pero nung pinirmahan ko, parang kinilabot ako.
Yeah.
Kasi that was very, sa akin, talagang I took it to heart. Pero madalas anong nangyayari, when you're faced with the day-to-day details of the job, nakakalimutan mo na yung mga ganon. Yung first feeling mo bakit ka sumali sa serbisyo. Ako naisip ko nung discuss natin to, Manolo, Leloy, and Fats, dapat every so often meron tayong yung reaffirmation of yung oath na yun.
And Carlo, Carlo, related to what you said, remember one of our early conversations also is that ang proyekto ng pagiging isang bansa ay maraming rituals, di ba? Ito nga, ito yung binabanggit ng bahagi ng, and I think partly ang keeper of the flame ng rituals na mahalaga sa ating proyekto paglalakbay itong nationhood is the bureaucracy, no? Kasi I think I'm very strongly for strengthening the bureaucracy, professionalizing the bureaucracy. Kasi sila talaga yung the unsung heroes of the government.
Saka kailangan yung best and the brightest po. Yung problema po, kami sa kataan natin na to deter po naman.
But as I said, kung meron pinapasa dahil kamag-anak, basta pumasa lang sa civil service, saan napunta yung mga top 10% sa civil service, di ba?
How do you encourage po our youth, our best and the brightest youth to join the bureaucracy para naman po lumakas yung gobyerno?
I think, in fact, yun nga ang ginagawa ko sa school ko ngayon, di ba? Because you know very well that the people from the private colleges and universities, Father knows this, very few of them want to enter government, di ba?
Yes.
Opo.
Oo. Kasi sa kanila, palakasan yan Maraming corruption yan, which is true. Kasi marami kang pagkakakitaan sa gobyerno. Sa regulatory functions mo lang, mag-approve ka lang o mag-disapprove, may pera yan. Magbigay ka lang ng lisensya o hindi, may pera yan, di ba? Kaya sa ibang tao, iyon naman ang gusto nilang pasukan. Kasi it's what they call that, malaki ang kita. Whether it's immigration or whether it's customs, the more regulatory you are, the more earnings you can have. That's why sa akin, when I was there, I was fighting for what I call regulatory reform. And I remember Secretary Del Rosario asking me, Lula, sabi niya, why are you so passionate about regulatory reform? Sabi ko, sir, kasi it affects my daily life. At that time, I started to put up a school. Maglagay lang ako ng, halimbawa, maglagay ka ng fire extinguisher. So halimbawa, bibili ka sa Wilcon. Ayaw, gusto ng Bureau of the Fire Department, sa kanila ka bibili. Kasi may patong yun, kasi doon sila kikita. Yung ganun ba? So I said, okay, regulatory reform, that's one. And it's true, you put the best and the brightest, some of them wither under the corruption until they become so disenchanted.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I stayed. I don't know whether I was part of the corruption, but what I'm saying is that I would not have lasted if there were not other people like the idealistic ones like Carlo. I mean, I am glad to meet people like Carlo, for instance, say, ma'am, ganito ang gawin natin, why don't we? Every time there's a young officer who approaches me, ma'am, why can't we do this? I feel re-energized. Kasi sabi ko, may pag-asa pa ang ang kinabukasan natin kung mayroong ganyang nag-iisip na kabataan.
Ako ma'am, I think I'd like to encourage you to make a pitch kasi marami pong kabataan na nanonood dito sa proyekto.
Yeah. Siguro ma'am, maybe we can end with that, Leloy, the Ambassador Leloy, sige, why don't you set up our closing,
Sige.
Well,
Ako, I guess my closing question for Ambassador is, you had a very successful career in the bureaucracy despite the fact na kayo mismo sinasabi niyo maraming korupsyon dyan, maraming madumi dyan. How do you encourage the youth to do what you did and to contribute to our nation in a similar fashion? In other words, meron po ba kayong pitch para sa the best and the brightest youth as to why they should join government?
Kasi this will work both ways, di ba? I can encourage those who are supporting certain kind of thinking to join government because there are those who might be carrying a prolonged agenda. I mean, you just have to look at some agenda concerns can be carried on for many years until you achieve it. I'm looking at the US, what they have done in 30 years to really change the government into a kind of government that carries out the extreme right. If you're watching what has been happening there. Sa atin, pwede rin mangyari yan. Kung hindi tayo mag-isip ng mga, as I said, that's why kailangan yung diversity of thought. Kailangan diversity of ideas. Ang pinaka-importante sa akin, yung mga kabataan na ang naiisip nila ay national security, national interest, at ang kabutihan ng bayan para hindi na tayo paulit-ulit na, para tayo hindi lang roller coaster, parang na ito Wheel of Fortune na parang umiikot na talaga. Consider joining government. If you might say it doesn't earn well, it earns better now because they have already increased the salaries, okay? You just have to look at the salaries of the teachers, the police, and military. You also have to look at the salaries of the other people in the other agencies than when I was there. And that's why even people now think also, if you want a secure job, join the civil service. Hindi ka maaalis doon Di ba? At the end of your life, remember, die at peace saying that you have done something for your country. You have done something for people beyond your family. The country is bigger than the family. And I don't like people when they say, ganito pala, mag-abroad na lang tayo. I don't like that solution. Just because you don't like your apartment, you should not abandon it. You fix it up.
yes.
Do something. Otherwise, wala nang mangyayari, di ba? So with that, I'm sorry, Leloy. I mean, I really want the young people who want to create change to really join we need 12 years minimum to really improve the way we are right now.
Yes. On that note po, Ambassador, marami pong salamat and really it's been a very inspiring conversation with you. So maraming salamat ma'am for joining us and Carlo, Manolo and Leloy, maraming salamat. Ma'am, we hope we can engage you again one of these days and maybe invite you if we have some youth programs, we will invite you to give a talk to them. So, ma'am, all the best in your
Opo.
school. You know that my primary love is education. So, good luck ho, ma'am, also in your. Is this your second career or this is the real career, being an educator?
I started as a teacher, as an educator. Then I got, what they call it, detoured in the foreign service because I thought the school so much. And I thought if I join a national agency, maybe I can create more, do more, di ba? Parang ano ako everything should be global di ba? Global ang tingin ko Everything that affects us as Filipinos, it's also global All issues are global. Tapos
Correct.
tinawag ako ng Miriam College. Yeah, can you please come back? So here
Yeah.
I am, climbing the second mountain.
Marami pong salamat, Ambassador, and thank you, Carlo, Leloy, and Manolo. Mga kaproyekto, again, we hope you picked up a lot at lalo na sa mga kabataan. Please take to heart the message of Ambassador and do consider joining government. Marami pong salamat.